Islam. The spread of Islam. The expansion of the Arab Empire in the years following the Prophet Muhammad's death led to the creation of caliphate occupying a vast geographical area. Conversion to Islam was boosted by missionary activities, particularly those of imams who easily intermingled with local populace to propagate religious teachings. These early caliphates, coupled with Muslim economics and trading and the later expansion of the Ottoman Empire, resulted in Islam's spread outwards from Mecca towards both the Atlantic and Pacific Ocean and the creation of the Muslim world. Trading played an important role in the spread of Islam in several parts of the world, notably Southeast Asia. Muslim dynasties were soon established and subsequent empires such as those of the Abbasids, Fatimids, Almoravids, Seljukids, and Ujurans, Adil and worseringly in Somalia, Mughals in India, Safavids in Persia, and Ottomans in Anatolia were among the largest and most powerful in the world. The people of the Islamic world created numerous sophisticated centers of culture and science with far-reaching mercantile networks, travelers, scientists, hunters, mathematicians, doctors, and philosophers, all contributing to the golden age of Islam. Islamic expansion in South and East Asia fostered cosmopolitan and eclectic Muslim cultures in the Indian subcontinent, Malaysia, Indonesia, and China. Within the first century of the establishment of Islam upon the Arabian Peninsula and the subsequent rapid expansion of the Arab Empire during the Muslim conquests, one of the most significant empires in world history was formed. For the subjects of this new empire, formerly subjects of the greatly reduced Byzantine and obliterated Sassanid empires, not much changed in practice. The objective of the conquests was of a practical nature more than anything else. As virtual land and water were scarce in the Arabian Peninsula, a real Islamization therefore only came about in the subsequent centuries. In contrast, for sanitary and often already monotheistic societies, Islam was substituted for a Byzantine or Sasanian political identity and for a Christian, Jewish, or Zoroastrian religious affiliation. Initially, conversion was neither required nor necessarily wished for. The Arab conquerors did not require the conversion as much as the subordination of non-Muslim peoples. At the outset, they were hostile to conversions because new Muslims diluted the economic and status advantages of the Arab. Only in subsequent centuries, with the development of the religious doctrine of Islam, and with that the understanding of the Muslim Ummah, did mass conversion take place. The new understanding by the religious and political leadership led in many cases to a weakening or breakdown of the social and religious structures of the parallel religious communities such as Christians and Jews. With the weakening of many churches, for example, and with the favoring of Islam and the migration of substantial Muslim Turkish populations into the areas of Anatolia and the Balkans, the social and cultural relevance of Islam were enhanced and many people were converted. During the Abbasid Caliphate, expansion ceased and the central disciplines of Islamic philosophy, theology, law, and mysticism became more widespread, and the gradual conversions of the populations within the empire occurred. Significant conversions also occurred beyond the extents of the empire, such as that of the Turkic tribes in Central Asia and people living in regions south of the Sahara in Africa through contact with Muslim traders active in the area and the Sufi order. In Africa, it spread along 3 routes across the Sahara via trading towns, such as Timbuktu, up the Nile Valley through the Sudan up to Uganda, and across the Red Sea and down East Africa through settlements such as Mombasa and Zanzibar. These initial conversions were of a flexible nature. The Arab-Muslim conquests followed a general pattern of a nomadic conquest of settled regions, whereby conquering peoples became the new military elite and reached a compromise with the old elites by allowing them to retain a local political, religious, and financial authority. Peasants, workers, and merchants paid taxes, while members of the old and new elites collected. The Arab conquerors did not repeat the mistake made by the Byzantine and Sasanian empires, who have tried and failed to impose an official religion on subject populations, which had caused resentments that made the Muslim conquests more acceptable to them. Instead, the rulers of the new empire generally respected the traditional Middle Eastern pattern of religious pluralism, which was not one of equality, but rather of dominance by one group over the others. After the end of military operations, which involved the sacking of some monasteries and confiscation of Zoroastrian fire temples in Syria and Iraq, the early Khalifa was characterized by religious tolerance, and people of all ethnicities and religions blended in public life. Before Muslims were ready to build mosques in Syria, they accepted Christian churches as holy places and shared with them local Christians. In Iraq and Egypt, Muslim authorities cooperated with Christian religious leaders. Numerous churches were repaired and new ones built during the Umayyad era. Some non-Muslim populations did experience persecution, however. After the Muslim conquest of Persia, Zoroastrians were given dhimmi, non-Muslim status, and subjected to persecutions. Discrimination and harassment began in the form of sparse violence. Zoroastrians were made to pay an extra tax called jizya. If they failed, they were killed, enslaved, or imprisoned. Those paying jizya were subjected to insults and humiliation by the tax collectors. Zoroastrians who were captured as slaves in wars were given their freedom if they converted to Islam. Now, I'm gonna talk about the origins of Islam. The first human Adam followed Islam, and that he directed worship to God alone, and no one else abided by his commandments. But through the passage of time and the dispersal of humanity throughout the earth, people strayed from his message and began directing worship to others instead of or along with God. Some took to worshipping the pious who passed away amongst them, while others took to worshipping spirits and forces of nature. It was then that God started to send messengers to humanity, steering them back to the worship of God alone, which accorded to their true nature, and warning them of the grave consequences of directing any type of worship to others besides him. The first of these messengers was Noah, who was sent to preach this message of Islam to his people, after they had started to direct worship to their pious forefathers along with God. Noah called these people to leave the worship of their idols and ordered them to return to the worship of God alone. Some of them followed the teachings of Noah, while the majority disbelieved in him. Those who followed Noah were followers of Islam or Muslims, while those that did not remained in their disbelief and were seized with a punishment for doing so. After Noah, God sent messengers to every nation who had strayed from the truth to steer them back to it. This truth was the same throughout time, to reject all objects of worship and to direct all worship without exception to God and no one else, the Creator and Lord of all, and to abide by His commandments. But as we mentioned before, because each nation differed regarding their way of life, language, and culture, specific messengers were sent to specific nations for a specific time period. God sent messengers to all nations and to the kingdom of Babylon. He sent Abraham, one of the earliest and greatest prophets, who called these people to reject the worship of the idols to which they were devoted. He called them to Islam, but they rejected him and even tried to kill him. God put Abraham through many tests, and he proved true to all of them. For his many sacrifices, God proclaimed that he would raise from amongst his progeny a great nation and choose prophets from amongst them. Whenever people from his progeny started to stray away from the truth, which was to worship none but God alone and to obey his commandments, God sent them another messenger, steering them back to. Consequently, we see that many prophets were sent amongst the progeny of Abraham, such as his two sons, Isaac and Ismail, along with Yaqub, from Israel, Joseph, David, Solomon, Moses, and of course Jesus, to mention a few. May the peace and blessings of God be upon them all. Each prophet was sent to the children of Israel, the Jews, when they went astray from the true religion of God, and it became obligatory upon them to follow the messengers which was sent to them and obey their commandments. All the messengers came with the same message, to reject worship of all other beings except God alone, and to obey his commandments. Some disbelieved in the prophets, while others believed. Those that believed were followers of Islam or Muslims. From amongst the messengers was Muhammad. May the mercy and blessings of God be upon him. From the progeny of Ismail, the son of Abraham, may the mercy and blessings of God be upon him, who was sent as a messenger in succession to Jesus. Muhammad preached the same message of Islam as the previous prophets and messengers, to direct all worship to God alone and none else, and to obey his commandments, in which the followers of the previous prophets went astray. So as we see, the Prophet Muhammad was not the founder of a new religion, as many people mistakenly think, but he was sent as the final prophet of Islam. By revealing his final message to Muhammad, which is an eternal and universal message for all of mankind, God finally fulfilled the covenant that he made with Abraham, just as it was incumbent upon those who were alive to follow the message of the succession of prophets which was sent to them. It becomes incumbent upon all of humanity to follow the message of Muhammad. God promised that this message would remain unchanged and fit in all times and places. Suffice is it to say that the way of Islam is the same as the way of Prophet Abraham, towering example of someone who submitted himself completely to God and directed worship to Him, alone and none else, and without any intermediaries. Once this is realized, it should be clear that Islam has the most continuous and universal message of any religion, because all prophets and messengers were Muslims, those who submitted to God's will, and they preached Islam, submission to the will of Almighty God, by worshipping Him alone and obeying His commandments. So we see that those who call themselves Muslims today do not follow a new religion. Rather, they follow the religion and message of all prophets and messengers, which were sent to humanity by God's command, also known as Islam. The word Islam is an Arabic word which literally means submission to God and submission to God. And Muslims are those who willfully submit to and actively obey God, living in accordance with His message.